Donald Neilson was a jobbing builder who turned to crime when his business failed to make money and became a murderer, kidnapper, and Britain's most wanted man. By the time Neilson kidnapped a teenage heiress from her home in Shropshire in 1975, he was already a multiple murderer, having previously supplemented his meagre earnings as a builder by robbing post offices at gunpoint. A decade of robberies had led to 3 postmasters being fatally shot, others being wounded, and amounts of money taken, but little of publicity which Neilson craved was generated from them. In 1967, he branched out into robbing sub-post offices. The logic to this was that the smaller post offices were usually only lightly defended and therefore easier to rob, and with over 23,000 in the UK, there was almost an infinite choice of targets. But of course, by the same logic, there would not have been much cash on the premises as main post offices either. He first raided a sub-post office in Nottingham and eventually 18 others in Lancashire and Yorkshire between 1967 and 1974. On February 16, 1972, Neilson broke into a sub-post office in Hayward, Lancashire. The owner, Lesley Whittle, had woken up and was wandering out of his bedroom when suddenly confronted by a hooded man. A struggle ensued and the man spoke to him in a West Indian accent. During the struggle, the shotgun Neilson was carrying went off, making a hole in the ceiling. Mr. Richardson managed to remove the hood and get a good look at Neilson. Neilson managed to escape out the rear of the building. Mr. Richardson helped the police put together a photo fit picture of the intruder, the first one of 6, none of which managed to resemble any of the others of Neilson. In 1974, Neilson targeted a sub-post office in Harrogate, North Yorkshire. After tying up the sub-postmaster's 18-year-old son, he confronted the sub-postmaster himself, Donald Skepper, as he lay in bed with his wife. Mr. Skepper attempted to apprehend Neilson, who shot him as he leapt towards him. Neilson then fled empty-handed, and Mr. Skepper died of his wounds. Police cautiously made a connection between his robbery and previous one 2 years earlier in Hayward, in Lancashire, although photo fits from the 2 robberies did not bear great resemblance. By the following September, more than 30,000 people had been interviewed in the search for the man who the media had labelled the Black Panther. Neilson lay low for 6 months before breaking into a sub-post office in the Higher Baxendale local of Accrington, Lancashire. The owner, Derek Astin, woke up to find an intruder in his bedroom and began a tussle with him, waking his wife. As the fight spilled out into the landing, the shotgun went off. Mr. Astin died in hospital of his wounds, while Neilson fell down the stairs but managed to recover and flee. Police quickly established that this was the same perpetrator as the killing in Harrogate due to the identical methods of entry, close and bullets. Another 2 months passed before Neilson struck again, this time choosing a different and more cunning method of entry after his previous tussles with sub-postmasters. Sidney Grayland, the owner of the sub-post office in Langley, West Midlands, went to answer a knock at the rear door. Neilson was waiting, hooded and carrying a torch with a bottle of ammonia attached. But he only succeeded in squirting himself, forced him to rip off his mask and reveal his face, just as Mr. Grayland's wife entered the scene. This prompted Neilson to attack her, fracturing her skull, while also shooting her husband. He left with £800 in postal orders from the safe. With Mr. Grayland dead and his wife critically injured, she survived and was able to give another description again, not showing huge similarities in the previous photo fits. Identical bullets to the previous 2 killings were recovered by police. They knew they were seeking one man in connection with the crimes, but the photo fits were too contrasting to be able to narrow down the potential suspects. By 1972, Neilson had decided he needed to step up his criminal activity if he was to gain the big payout he wanted and receive the publicity he craved. He then read an article in the Daily Express about Lesley Whittle, a teenage schoolgirl who had been left £82,500 by her deceased father, George, in his will. Mr. Whittle had run a successful coach company. Neilson continued with his sub-post office raids while also concocting a way to kidnap Lesley and extract a large ransom from her family. By the beginning of 1975, Neilson was ready to carry out his plan. On January the 14th, he drove to Whittle's home in Highley, Shropshire, and silently broke in to the 17-year-old sixth former's bedroom. There was neither a struggle nor noise, and he allowed Lesley to put on a dressing gown and slippers before quietly taking her at gunpoint. On the lounge table, Neilson left a ransom demand on a box of chocolates, which he punched out on a roll of dynamo tape. The ransom demand read, "No police, 50,000 ransom to be ready to deliver. Wait for telephone call at Swan Shopping Centre. Telephone box 6 p.m. to 1 p.m. If no call, return following evening. When you answer, give name only and listen. You must follow instructions without argument. From time you answer, you're on a time limit. If police or tricks, death. Swan Shopping Centre, Kidderminster. Deliver 50,000 in a white van. 50,000 in old notes. £25,000 in £1 notes. And £25,000 in £5. There'll be no exchange. Only after £50,000 has been cleared will the victim be released." When Lesley failed to come downstairs for breakfast the next morning, her mother went to her room and saw the empty bed. She then went to the lounge and found the note and immediately raised the alarm. Lesley's brother Donald Whittle cautiously brought in the police, bearing in mind the threat on the ransom demand, and it was agreed that he should not take the ransom as directed. Meanwhile, Neilson had taken Lesley to a disused drainage shaft in a beauty spot in the town of Kidsgrove, Staffordshire. There he left her with a rope round her neck and basic food requirements and some bedding. However, during the next few hours, a freelance reporter had heard that a kidnapped incident was underway and gave the story to a radio station, which, with some disregard for Lesley's safety, broadcast it. The police duly withdrew Mr. Whittle from the ransom scene to avoid panicking the kidnapper into believing it was a honey trap. The phone in the phone box rang at just before midnight, but there was no one to answer it. The next night, a hoax call sent Donald Whittle on a wild goose chase to a false rendezvous. The same night, an angry Neilson shot security guard Gerald Smith while attempting to raid a security depot. In the hurry to escape the scene, Neilson left his stolen green Morris 1300 just a few hundred yards from Smith's body. The police failed to notice the car for 8 days, but when it was finally discovered and searched, a number of relevant items were discovered in the boot, including a sleeping bag, a tape recording of Lesley's voice, torches, a gun and ammunition, and some dynamo tape. Meanwhile, on the third night of the kidnap, Donald Whittle waited at home for the phone to ring. When it did, a recording of Lesley's voice told him to go and wait by a phone box in Kidsgrove. Mr. Whittle drove to Bridgenorth Police Station. At this point, police had not realised the connection between the wanted Black Panther, who did post office murders, and the kidnap. And so Scotland Yard were in charge of the Whittle kidnap investigation. They did not think to exchange information with each other. Mr. Whittle then drove to Kidsgrove, followed by several unmarked police cars. Whittle twice got lost, and it was nearly 3 a.m. when he finally got to the location, and then another 30 minutes to locate the hidden message. The message instructed him to go to Bathpool Park and wait for a flashlight signal. He did so and waited, but no signal came. The problem was that Neilson had driven the route and worked out that Whittle should arrive at Bathpool Rock at 2:30 a.m. A couple in a car had already arrived and were baffled by the flashing light they saw. The couple also saw a police car in the car park, a claim strenuously denied by the local police. Neilson had watched it all happen and, convinced that Mr. Whittle was cooperating in the police trap, went into a rage. Received wisdom suggests that he went back to the drainage shaft where Lesley Whittle was held and pushed her off the ledge, throttling her. However, a conflicting report on a more emotive scale said she died from shock and terror. By this point, the police had matched the findings in the abandoned car to the sub-post office murders and realised to their horror that Lesley had been kidnapped by the Black Panther. Until this point, they had not been convinced that the abductor was dangerous enough to carry out his threat of killing his hostage. Previously, senior crime officers from Scotland Yard had discounted a full search at Bathpool Park, claiming there'd be nothing to find. However, on the discovery of the Morris 1300, a search was immediately ordered and a shaft was found where Lesley's naked body was discovered, hanging from a wire cable. Her feet were only a few inches from the ground. Almost 2 months had passed since the day she was abducted, though the post-mortem suggested she had been killed within 48 hours of her capture. Had the police conducted a search when Neilson issued his first demand, Lesley might have well been found alive. As a result, there was recriminations within the two police forces investigating the kidnapping of Lesley, not least the demotion back to uniformed beat officer of the detective in charge of the case. Certainly Donald Whittle, in an interview he gave outside the police station after being informed that Lesley's body had been found, laid the blame for his sister's death squarely on the considerable publicity garnered by the kidnap. Neilson remained at large for much of 1975 and returned to post office robberies, though he committed no more killings in the raids he carried out. He was finally arrested at the end of the year, with the investigation nowhere near knowing who or where the Black Panther was. However, on December the 11th, two uniformed police officers were patrolling the streets of Mansfield, Nottinghamshire, when they spotted a man in black outside the post office, carrying a holdall and moving suspiciously. They called him over to the car and asked him what he was doing. Keeping calm and friendly, Neilson said he was on his way home from work and gave a false name. One of the policemen asked Neilson to write his name down. At this point, Neilson produced a sawn-off shotgun. Neilson forced one officer into the back seat and then got into the front passenger seat. He pointed the shotgun at the policeman driving and told him to drive to Blidworth, about 6 miles away. At one point, the rear-seated officer spotted that the gun was pointed away from the driver and lunged at the gun, pulling the muzzle up at the same time. The driver slammed on the brakes and the gun went off into the roof of the car. The car stopped outside a chip shop in Rainworth, and as the two policemen fought with Neilson, 2 customers in the shop joined in. The 4 men struggled with Neilson, who fought like a wild animal, but eventually was subdued and handcuffed to a handrail. At the police station, Neilson gave a false name and deliberated at some length before answering any questions put to him. Eventually, he gave his real name and address. It was only when Neilson's home in Bradford, West Yorkshire was searched that police realised that the man who violently struggled against them was the Black Panther, responsible for the murder of Lesley and 3 sub-postmasters. All of his armour accessories were discovered, along with a range of knives, guns and ammunition, some wire which matched that used to strangle Lesley, and even a model of a Black Panther. Under questioning, Neilson admitted after 12 hours to kidnapping Lesley, but said her death was an accident. He also claimed that he never intended to kill any of the postmasters, but was charged with 4 counts of murder, as well as numerous related offences. In March 1976, Gerald Smith, a security guard whom Neilson shot during the hunt for Lesley, died as a result of his injuries and the after effects of the incident. However, Neilson could not be charged with his murder under UK law at that time, which declared that a murder charge could not be brought in respect to a victim who dies more than a year after the day of the incident, which brings about their death. The law has now since been changed. On July the 1st, Neilson was unanimously convicted. He was given a life sentence for each murder committed, 4 in total, plus another life term for causing grievous bodily harm to Mrs. Grayland, the wife of one of the sub-postmasters killed. He was also convicted of kidnapping, blackmail, making threats to kill, burglary, and possessing firearms with intent to endanger life. The shooting of the security guard was ordered to lie on file. He was acquitted on 2 charges of attempted murder. The Lord Chief Justice set a 30-year minimum term for Neilson soon after his conviction, but successive Home Secretaries then imposed a whole life tariff. In the early hours of the 17th of December 2011, Neilson was taken from Norwich Prison to Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital with breathing difficulties. He was pronounced dead the next day. There was also much denouncement at the police's inability to identify or locate the Black Panther by the time Lesley's body had been found and Neilson had vanished. Ultimately, the police were saved further pressure by the actions of alert uniformed patrol officers, which led to Neilson's arrest. Had Neilson decided to end his criminal activity after Lesley's death, it is possible he would never have been caught.